only in name, as Hatshepsut clearly felt like she had just as much right to rule Egypt as any man.
The important thing to stress about this beginning is that women are powerful. This is where we get in Egypt woman power.
When scientists finally decoded Queen Hatshepsut's ancient DNA, they expected to confirm long-held theories about Egypt's mysterious female pharaoh. Instead, the results revealed something so astonishing that historians, archaeologists, and genetic experts were left scrambling for answers. Hidden within those fragile strands were clues that challenged everything we believed about her lineage, her health, and even her rise to power. So, could this discovery rewrite the legacy of one of Egypt's most influential rulers and expose secrets buried for over 3,000 years? And what exactly did her DNA reveal that changes history forever? The hidden lineage of a forgotten queen. She was a ruler who stepped beyond every boundary of her age, a woman remembered for donning the royal beard and commanding an empire with a steadiness that rivaled any king before her. Yet long after the sands softened her monuments and time dimmed her name, Queen Hatshepsut left behind something far more intimate than stone, traces of a biological history sealed within a mummy whose identity puzzled scholars for generations. Strangely, the revelation that would later unsettle modern Egyptology began not with high-tech sequencing, but with a single tooth preserved in a box carved with her cartouche. That tiny molar, examined in 2007 by Dr. Zahi Hawass and his team from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, helped connect an overlooked mummy in tomb, KV60, to the formidable woman who once redefined the throne itself. For many, that match felt like the final word on her remains, a long-awaited end to a historical mystery. But history often slips out of our grasp just when we think we understand it. In 2023, a new generation of researchers revisited her remains using advanced genomic analysis, expecting only to confirm the earlier findings. Instead, the results pulled them into unfamiliar territory. Her DNA did not align with the maternal signatures typical of Egypt's 18th dynasty, nor with broader Theban lineages mapped across museum collections. What emerged instead were patterns so unusual that the team initially assumed the sample had been compromised. Multiple independent labs repeated the extraction and sequencing, each attempt meticulously controlled to rule out contamination. Yet, the same unexpected profile kept appearing. Her maternal markers resembled a nearly vanished genetic cluster, previously detected only in a few ancient remains near the eastern Sahara, individuals who lived long before Egypt's earliest dynasties took shape. This wasn't merely a genealogical curiosity. It suggested that Hatshepsut's roots might trace back to a community predating the pharaonic world entirely, a population whose presence in the region had always been debated but never definitively connected to Egypt's royal bloodlines. For scholars, the implications were dizzying. Hatshepsut, a pharaoh whose reign reshaped trade routes, monumental building, and religious identity, seemed to carry within her genome the whisper of a forgotten people, one that may have influenced Egypt long before written records tried to trace its past. Some researchers even pointed to an ancient tradition that spoke of early, enigmatic groups who guided the Nile Valley before history acknowledged its first kings. But before we explore what her DNA ultimately revealed, we must first unravel the deeper origins that shaped the queen behind the crown, the rise of a woman who rewrote power. That unexpected ancestry only deepens the story of the woman whose life was already a study in boldness, wrapped in silence. Long before her DNA stirred debates in modern labs, Hatshepsut's memory had lived like a quiet tremor beneath the temples of Thebes, felt but not fully understood. She had always been the pharaoh who refused the limits set before her, yet the roots of that defiance began much earlier than the day she placed the royal crown on her head. Born around 1507 BCE into the golden house of Thutmose I and his great wife Ahmose, she entered a world where royal blood carried weight, but talent carried destiny. Even as a girl, she moved through palace halls, not as a passive spectator, but as someone being shaped for responsibility. Priests of Amun taught her the language of ritual, scribes guided her through administration, and diplomats exposed her to the subtleties of political negotiation. The whispers in the temple courts said the gods favored her, and perhaps she carried that belief quietly within herself. Yet, life at court was never simple. To protect the purity of the royal line, she married her half-brother Thutmose II, a political union with duty but little warmth. Their only child, Neferure, arrived early, but no son followed. The future of Egypt shifted onto the small shoulders of Thutmose III, the king's son by a lesser wife. When Thutmose II died unexpectedly, Egypt risked sliding into instability, leaving Hatshepsut as the only figure strong enough to guide the throne. She stepped forward as regent, promising to guard the kingdom until the boy king could rule on his own. But power has a way of reshaping itself around those who understand it. As seasons passed, her presence in state affairs grew steady and unmistakable. Royal decrees carried her authority, ceremonies unfolded under her command, and slowly the image of a woman standing in the shadow of a child king faded. Supported by loyal advisors and influential priests, she made a decision that turned ancient tradition on its head. She declared herself pharaoh, not queen, not caretaker, pharaoh. To anchor her reign in divine legitimacy, she crafted a story told in stone. Amun himself, she said, took the form of her father and conceived her so the throne would someday belong to her by divine design. This was not arrogance, it was strategy, a way to give spiritual structure to a political reality. Inscribed walls showed her wearing the Nemes headdress, the royal kilt, even the ceremonial beard, not to imitate a man but to embody a role that transcended gender. Under her leadership, Egypt blossomed. Instead of choosing conquest, she chose stability, prosperity, and expansion through peaceful exchange. Trade routes once abandoned reopened, linking Egypt to distant lands. Her most celebrated achievement, the Grand Expedition to Punt, brought back treasures rarely seen in the Nile Valley: ivory, incense, exotic animals, and living myrrh trees planted proudly within her temple complex. Each carried her message. Egypt was thriving, and the world knew it. Her architectural vision reshaped the landscape, but nothing captured her story more elegantly than her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Rising in terraces cut into the cliffs near modern Luxor, it felt less like a building and more like a bridge between the human world and the realm of the gods. Its walls spoke in scenes of her divine birth, her coronation, her devotion, her ambitions, a life carved not for vanity, but for permanence. For 20 years, art, agriculture, and faith flourished under her guidance. Egypt's grandeur reached new heights, and she stood not as an accessory to power, but as the embodiment of it. Yet the deeper her legacy rooted itself, the more fiercely history resisted her. Before we follow where her DNA revelations lead next, we must first explore the shadows that began forming around her reign. So keep watching. The queen who refused to disappear. And as her origins began to raise unsettling questions, another mystery waited in the shadows, one that had haunted Egypt for centuries. What happened after her reign ended was nothing short of a quiet war against her memory. Statues once crafted in her honor were shattered, royal inscriptions carved with her titles were scraped away, and her image, once proudly displayed in temples, was mutilated as if she had never worn the double crown at all. Thutmose III, the child she once guided to the throne, seemed determined to erase every trace of her rule. For generations, Hatshepsut became a whisper in the royal timeline, a pharaoh without a body, a presence without proof. Her tomb appeared empty, her remains missing, and scholars debated whether her disappearance signaled betrayal, secrecy, or something far more tragic. Yet history often reveals its secrets in the least dramatic rooms. In the early 1900s, long before discovering the tomb of Tutankhamun, British archaeologist Howard Carter entered a small, unimpressive chamber in the Valley of the Kings, K460. It held 2 female mummies, one inside a coffin inscribed with the name of Sitre-In, Hatshepsut's nurse, and another abandoned on the floor, unmarked and uncelebrated. Carter recorded his findings and sealed the tomb again, unaware that the figure lying in the dust would someday upend Egyptian history. More than a century later, in 2007, Dr. Zahi Hawass reopened K560 with new technology and sharper questions. His team performed CT scans, bone studies, and detailed examinations of both mummies. The nurse was identified quickly, but the heavier woman with crossed arms, a pose reserved for royalty, remained a mystery. The breakthrough came far from the desert, inside a quiet storage room in the Cairo Museum, where curators uncovered a small wooden box stamped with Hatshepsut's cartouche. Inside lay a single molar, preserved for more than 3,000 years. When specialists compared it with the scans of the unidentified mummy's jaw, the match was exact, root to socket fitting with eerie precision. It was proof stronger than DNA itself. The forgotten body from the floor of K460 was Hatshepsut, but her rediscovery was only the beginning. What researchers found within her remains revealed a deeper truth, one carried not in monuments or legends, but in the fragile chemistry of her own body. Stay with us, because the secret hidden inside her bones changes everything we thought we knew. The Queen who spoke through her bones. When the team of specialists, led by Dr. Angelique Corthals and Dr. Yahya Gad, began examining the fragile remains found in K460, they didn't expect the body to offer much. Mummification, after all, was both an art and a chemical storm, resins, oils, and salts that preserved shape while quietly destroying DNA. But new methods of mitochondrial analysis and careful PCR amplification coaxed tiny fragments of genetic code out of her tissues. They compared those fragments with samples taken from royal mummies, such as Thutmose I and Ahmose Nefertari, and the results aligned with an unmistakable signature. The woman in K460 belonged directly to the maternal bloodline of the 18th dynasty. It was the biological confirmation scholars had chased for generations. The lost queen had finally identified herself without uttering a word. Yet DNA was only the beginning. CT scans exposed the truth her body could no longer hide. She had reached roughly 50 years of age, consistent with historical estimates of Hatshepsut's final years, but her bones told a heavier story. Areas weakened by lesions, brittle deterioration, and dense fatty deposits hinted at severe obesity and advanced diabetes. More troubling still were signs of widespread bone cancer. For centuries, theories circled around murder, palace intrigue, or divine punishment, but the scans revealed something far more intimate. She was dying slowly, painfully, and long before her name was chiseled out of history. Oddly enough, the clue that clarified her suffering came from something almost overlooked. A small alabaster jar among her belongings, still carrying a faint ancient scent chemical testing, revealed traces of benzopyrene, a tar-like compound known today as a dangerous carcinogen. In her time, similar mixtures of resins, oils, and pitch served as balms for ritual purity or personal care. Hatshepsut, deeply devoted to ceremonial cleanliness, may have used these preparations daily. What she believed maintained her sacred appearance may have delivered poison into her bloodstream over years. Her genetic profile showed an inherited vulnerability to metabolic disorders, meaning her body was even more susceptible to the toxins in those balms. The irony was sharp. The queen who commanded an empire and reshaped Egypt's identity was undone by substances meant to preserve her power and beauty. The balm that softened her skin was quietly altering her cells. The fragrance of divinity was also the scent of her decline. The mosaic of her final months became clearer. A ruler still respected but growing weaker, burdened by swelling limbs and constant pain. Her public presence thinned. Her duties quietly shifted to those around her. This slow deterioration added a new dimension to the later rise of Thutmose III. No violent overthrow, no midnight conspiracy, just the natural filling of a void left by a fading monarch. After her death, he moved swiftly to erase her legacy, chiseling her name from monuments and shattering statues, perhaps to restore conventional order or to guard the legitimacy of his line. But just as earlier findings pushed researchers to rethink her final days, new genetic clues forced them to reconsider the very origins of Hatshepsut herself. Echoes in the blood of a forgotten queen. Some specialists began cautiously suggesting that her ancestry might not only have survived through a narrow family branch, but that it carried features older and far stranger than anything recorded in the royal annals. What made this theory even more compelling were the unusual mutations hidden within her mitochondrial DNA, markers tied not only to lineage, but also to traits that shaped her body. These tiny chemical signatures appeared to influence melanin levels, bone strength, and overall physical build, traits that matched her statue's firm jawlines and broad shoulders more than any written description ever had. It stirred an unexpected idea. Perhaps her masculine portrayals were not just political strategy, but a reflection of biological traits that made her look different in ways her sculptors simply replicated. The mystery deepened when a research team in Copenhagen compared her genetic fragments with samples taken from royal mummies connected to her life, Thutmose I, II, and III. The sequences confirmed she belonged to the ruling bloodline, yet they also showed a strange divergence, a thread of ancestry that had no clear match within the Thutmosid family. It was as though her maternal roots had come from beyond Egypt's borders, from a lineage that had left almost no trace in recorded history. Scholars revisited ancient inscriptions at Deir el-Bahari, where Hatshepsut's mother, Ahmose, was described in the legend of Amun's divine visitation. For generations, the story was dismissed as temple propaganda, but with the new genetic findings, some wondered whether the myth hinted at a sacred maternal ancestry because it was unusual. A few researchers, quietly and often reluctantly, pointed out that her DNA showed faint similarities to ancient populations from regions like Anatolia and early Mesopotamia, communities believed to have interacted with Egypt long before its golden age. If true, it would suggest that her bloodline was part of a larger, older tapestry of cultures woven together long before history began recording names. Yet not every revelation spoke of myth or distant origins. When scientists examined her nuclear DNA, they found medical patterns that challenged long-held theories about her death. Earlier studies suggested diabetes or cancer, but the newer sequences pointed toward an autoimmune disorder, possibly lupus or a rare hormonal imbalance. This could explain her fragile bones, swelling, and even the partial hair loss hinted at in her surviving depictions. The elaborate wigs, heavy crowns, and false beards she wore might not have been symbols alone. They may have been tools to conceal physical changes she could not control. Even the materials used in her embalming added new threads to the puzzle. Embedded in the resins were traces of a plant compound similar to frankincense, but chemically more complex than anything seen in typical 18th dynasty burials. A mass spectrometry suggested a preservation formula far ahead of its time, perhaps passed down from a culture older than Egypt's earliest kingdoms. Combined with the unusual genetics, it rekindled an old question whispered only at the edges of academic research. Had Hatshepsut inherited more than royal blood? Had she carried remnants of knowledge from a forgotten civilization buried deeper than the Nile's own memory? Let's find out. Hatshepsut's hidden legacy, genes, power, and mystery. As whispers of Hatshepsut's DNA spread through the academic world, the debate ignited like wildfire. Traditionalists dismissed the findings as fanciful, accusing researchers of chasing myths, while others suspected suppression, a quiet effort to preserve the official narrative of Egypt's origins. For the public, however, the story was irresistible. A queen who ruled with the authority of a man, interred with divine pomp, yet carrying the blood of a people who may have vanished long before the pyramids rose from the Nile sands. Comparisons soon surfaced between her statues and the androgynous depictions of Akhenaten and Nefertiti from a century later, raising tantalizing questions about hidden lineages and recurring traits in the royal bloodlines. One fragment from her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari hinted at a mystery now amplified by science. It described her as the daughter of the ones who came before, a phrase long interpreted symbolically. Yet, with the DNA evidence revealing a lineage predating known dynasties, that line could signify a lost civilization, ancestors whose genetic legacy flowed into the very foundation of Egyptian royalty. By 2025, an international initiative sought to sequence every royal mummy using next-generation nanotechnology, aiming to trace the evolution of Egypt's rulers from the Old Kingdom onward. Early results suggested that Hatshepsut's anomalies were not isolated. Faint echoes appeared even in the earliest kings of the First Dynasty, implying that the concept of divine kingship may have been rooted in a rare, preserved genetic inheritance. Yet the story deepened further. Some sequences in her DNA remain classified, withheld under official privacy protocols for ancient remains. Rumors hint at findings that could link Egypt's myths of celestial origins with tangible genetic proof, evidence the world might not be ready to accept. Through this lens, Hatshepsut emerges not merely as a historical figure, but as an enigma. Her audacious reign, entwined with biology, myth, and power, modern analysis allows us to see her rule anew. She did not disguise herself as a king out of deceit. It was strategy. By embodying both male and female authority, she established a form of legitimacy that mirrored the cosmic principle of Ma'at, the harmony of opposites. Her temples, particularly the terraces of Deir el-Bahari, aligned with the rising sun, symbolizing the union of earth and sky, life and eternity. In art, religion, and governance, she demonstrated that true power transcends gender. Her DNA tells the final chapter of her story, yet it also restores the first. Within her cells lie the record of ambition, brilliance, and human vulnerability, the proof that a woman could govern the greatest empire of her time not through fear, but through intellect, construction, and vision. Her reign lasted just over 20 years, but the echoes of her influence ripple through millennia, her temple still golden under the Luxor sun, whispering that greatness belongs not to men or women, but to those daring enough to defy convention. And seamlessly, her genetic story invites us to peer deeper into the origins that shaped the queen herself. So, what do you think? Could Hatshepsut's DNA reveal a hidden civilization that shaped Egypt's rulers long before the pyramids? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.